sex ebbs and flows like tide. You know, when we're young, we think you got to get it up and it's got to stay up or it's over.
Up until this point, Jane had been involved with a series of dismissible male mentors with whom she lived on and off. Still, she was a very middle-class young woman, eager to shed her puritanical inhibitions. The U.S. just wasn't getting with it the way the wild and woolly Parisians were. The America Jane left in '63 sang out in protest, and the times were indeed a-changing. John Kennedy's assassination ushered in Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. Civil rights demonstrators swarmed over Washington. Feminists stormed the male citadels, and the U.S. waded even further into the big muddy of Vietnam. In Paris, Jane pirouetted for the cameras with French heartthrob Alain Delon. Soon, she was toe dancing with Roger Vadim.
People used to call her the Hollywood Brigitte Bardot. Nobody would take her seriously. She was doing this little comedy, quite nice, but a little silly, I must say. Even she did some with a good director. And she knew that she will not make it. And she did something so clever, so courageous. She was only, 23, 24 years old. Everyone go to Hollywood to make a career. Greta Garbo, Ingrid Bergman, etc., etc. She did the contrary. She left Hollywood for Europe in order to find herself and to try to make a career.
What she found was a freewheeling lifestyle as Vadim's latest creation. Like Brigitte Bardot and Catherine Deneuve before her, Jane set up housekeeping with her mentor and took the partnership onto the movie set of La Ronde or The Circle of Love. Off-screen, Jane meticulously remodeled the ancient farmhouse she bought outside Paris, while Vadim busied himself revamping Jane.
She had a kind of feeling that she was not right enough. She was never good enough for something. She was never doing well. And I said, no, don't be afraid to be yourself. Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
I met Roger Vadim the first time when I was about 17, and I didn't like him at all. I didn't like what he represented. I didn't like what I'd heard about him. And I guess it was when you have this very stereotype and rigid image of someone who then turns out to be not what you imagined, you sort of go overboard the other way. And I fell in love with him.
The new risk-taking Jane that Vadim encouraged flew to Hollywood and braved the Western satire Cat Ballou with Lee Marvin that proved her a big box office draw. With the release of a previous French film for Vadim, she became an even larger attraction in America.
The nude poster on Times Square, that was really terrible. Not because she was nude, but it was so ugly. She sued the distributor, and then it was worse because they just put a little slip or whatever. Then it was not only ugly, but it became pornographic.
Angered by her public display, Jane took legal action, which only made matters worse. Nevertheless, she parlayed the notoriety into the lead opposite Robert Redford and Marlon Brando in The Chase. Shortly thereafter, the Fonda Vadim duo again faced the naked truth and sued Playboy magazine over unauthorized nude photos from another of their films, La Curée or The Game Is Over.
Jane was not, in no way at this time, upset about nudity. If she didn't want to be naked on a scene, it was more because she thought her breasts were too small or her bottom too big. But the principle of nudity didn't upset her.
I know that she was a sex symbol to other people. To me, she was my sister, and I thought that this man was making her do some very corny stuff.
That wouldn't stop Peter from later working with Vadim himself, appearing with Jane as spirits of the dead, in which brother and sister played out an incestuous theme.
It's cold. In the Metzgenstein family, a man would offer his cloak to a lady. Apparently not in yours. Why don't you come and dine this evening? You'll feel at home. Most of my guests are buzzards or bears or boars. It should amuse you.
I have no wish to join your menagerie.
I'm not accustomed to being refused.
One should beware of bad habits, cousin.
Who do you think you are?
A happy man.
Not all the corny stuff Jane would eventually do in this period could be blamed on Vadim. Notably, Hurry Sundown with Michael Caine, Any Wednesday opposite Jason Robards, or the rematch with Robert Redford for Barefoot in the Park. However, it was very much at Vadim's insistence that he and Jane were married in Las Vegas in 1965, quieting somewhat the rampant rumors of their bizarre liaison.
It was the middle 60s, drugs were coming in, sort of free-form love. Jane threw herself into that with enormous abandon.
We were mixed up sometime with a new philosophy of free sex, but it didn't go really very far, no way.
And Vadim hardly tried to stop her. He was as involved as she was.
I remember more our relation as a very romantic and tender relation, and this so-called orgies or whatever was more in the... It was fashionable at the time. It was more in the mind of people than real. And if she did, you know, try to stay with her time and to be a modern woman, or whatever that means, I think she was not at ease. She's really much more a person who cares for a monogamous relation than anything else.
However, in his internationally published book, Vadim was more explicit. In late 1965, the Vadims became the very with-it darlings of the Malibu beach crowd in California, tossing swinging parties for the Hollywood elite, including Henry and a young airline stewardess, Shirley Adams, who would become Fonda's fifth and final wife. By 1967, Jane had swapped her role as madcap Malibu hostess and returned to Paris as Vadim's high-flying heroine who flits through the galaxy in a quest for perfect sex.
Barbarella psychedella, there's a kind of cockle shell about you. Barbarella.
Oh, it's sort of nice, isn't it?
Yes. When you reach the crescendo, you will die. Pleasure.
You burned out the excess machine! You've blown all its fuses!
My goodness.
What kind of girl are you? Have you no shame? You'll pay for this.
The rest of the world was preoccupied with more earthly matters. Back in the U.S., the disenchantment with the Vietnam War had spread across all class lines as young and old and rich and poor demonstrated against the continued involvement. Jane made her position very clear on the cover of Newsweek, establishing herself as the exotic siren she indeed was. In 1968, Jane was once again the busy mistress of the farmhouse outside Paris, waiting to star in her last and finest collaboration with Vadim, the birth of their daughter Vanessa. Jane flew Susan Blanchard to France for the occasion.
She was very determined to do everything absolutely the right way and perfectly, and she didn't believe in this and she didn't believe in that, and she didn't want Vanessa to have a pacifier, and she had very definite theories on everything, the way she does today.
She has, I don't know, maybe 25 books about how to raise a child, how to feed a child, the psychology of the newborn, etc. She does everything very seriously, like she does in politics, by the book.
Politics became more significant with motherhood. The America Jane brought the infant Vanessa to had been rocked by the killings of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. Dogged by Vietnam, President Lyndon Johnson had not sought re-election. His Republican successor, Richard Nixon, stepped up the war, supposedly to end it. Amidst those harsh realities,